All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here at the Challenger Center broadcasting live, and we've got a few attendees, and I will definitely adjust the camera later on for Q&A. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Mike Houghton and Jacob Waits. Thank you, Mike, so much for coming from Refresh Tallahassee, and you also work for Cura Solutions. I'll give you the floor to introduce yourself and as well as Jacob. And you can talk a little bit about Refresh Tallahassee. Jacob's going to talk about the future of collaboration with some awesome modern tools, and we can take it from there. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all. Some new faces, some familiar faces. So welcome back to those I've met. And I'd like to afterwards get to know those of you who are new faces. So thanks. And thank you, Julia. And Domi, Startup Week Tallahassee. It's pretty cool to be able to partner with Refresh Tallahassee and Startup Week. And it's been a great week. I'm glad to be here. And Jacob, very glad to have you with us. When I think about Domi, I think about you because that's where I met you way back in the day, once upon a time. So that connection is pretty sweet. And for those of you who haven't met Jacob, in addition to being a designer that I met back in the day at Domi, he has gone on to do some pretty exciting things with IDEO, a company that I've had a crush on for a long time, and Adobe, a company whose software I use every day, and other startups. And he can maybe talk a little bit about what he's heading into next. But I'm just very glad to have Jacob with us. Among other things, in addition to being a great designer, he is someone who knows how to gather people, how to collaborate and solve problems both on his own and together as a group. So interested in hearing what you have to say along those lines as well, Jacob. But I'm going to go ahead, and I think what we'll do is I'll turn it over to Jacob to present for as long as you want. I guess we do have a time window, but just please don't feel inhibited. And then when you're done and you wrap it up, we'll have some Q&A from folks in the room, folks online as well. And Julia's going to help sort of facilitate the online part of that conversation. So thanks again, Jacob. Why don't you take it away?
Totally. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's just, you nailed it on the head. I think basically I've been around, I went through time at IDEO and also at Adobe, and then been kind of in the Web3 space lately at a place called Station. And so right now I've been kind of moving towards this different flow of what we call collaboration, right? Because I think I'm going to share my screen now. One sec. Just want to confirm everybody can see that. We good? I think we might be good. All right. So yeah, so this is just to talk about the future of collaboration. And I think in terms of what we're trying to think about when we think about this is the day and age that we're in. When I think we're at a major turning point, right? We just had this major pandemic work shift. And there's a really great New Yorker article that I was reading like a couple weeks ago that was about hunter-gatherers and how, we as a human society have been trying to always focus on work that fulfills us, right? And so in this great change, a lot of what we had built up in the modern workplace shifted entirely. And so as something, in us, where we're coming into an office every day and having all these processes, having that be overturned, what does that mean for us? And when we try to return to these kind of workplaces that have been very much, in flux over the past 2 years, what else can we reimagine? And I say this in terms of methods of working and methods of achieving collaboration, because I think collaboration happens a lot with designers in the workplace, right? So, I mean, and if I think about what humans naturally enjoy, it's doing these very practical, difficult tasks that always require like us to be upskilling and getting better. And this goes back to, us being hunter-gatherers back in, and there was a lot of great studies that were cited in that article of how we as people want to constantly be upskilling, and that takes time and effort and arduous kind of practicing day and day to upskill ourselves to accomplish our goals. And so I think the interesting thing is that that's how we work best, right? So we naturally feel good doing this long, uninterrupted focus work. Maybe I might have like a morning meeting and an end of day check-in. And this is something, at IDEO, me and basically the rest of our core team always love to think about what's called the maker schedule, right? Of I'm going to do my morning communication, everybody's syncing together, and then we're going to go in the shop and make stuff all day. Maybe might have lunch, stop for a chat during that time. And then at the end of the day, we'll check in and see what we did, what we might do tomorrow, that kind of thing. And I think that's not the norm for a lot of workplaces. And especially now when we're in this remote work setting, that's completely fractured. Like the result of modern workflows is very short burst, it's ad hoc, it's intermediate, right? Like, I wake up and I check Slack, and maybe I do some work, and then I have to answer some emails, and then I do a little bit of work, and then I have to go, mess with my calendar and do some meetings, and then maybe I do a little tiny bit of work. And even if I might get the same amount of work done in that day, it is just terribly tiring and frustrating, and makes me not want to collaborate with other people because I'm constantly being taken out of my core workflow, right? It makes doing that work much less satisfying, and it's hard to see the long tail goal of what my short-term span of work is actually doing for me. And another thing that's kind of compounding this is that we're creating these like objects as output, right? We're working very fast, we're making complex deliverables, and I'm not incentivized to take other people along in that journey with me. I think there's a lot of stuff that we're losing, right? We're losing a lot of teaching and learning that used to happen, right next to each other, when we're in the process of like collaborating and building stuff. Now there's like the Zoom window and everything that gets in the way of facilitating that kind of interaction. And the problem isn't that remote work is hurting us in that way. It's just that we need to relearn and learn new skills on how to make that preserved. So what I want to talk about is actually collaboration culture and design culture, and how that really helps to bring us into a better autonomy center. And so I think like the best work cultures that I've seen have autonomy at the center, with learning creativity as this method of feeding this hunter-gatherer inside of us. So I just wanted to talk about some of the things that you need and define that kind of culture. And I think all of this comes back to design retention, right? So we're talking about how we collaborate in a workplace. And this is also something that our cultural leaders should be thinking about inside of like design, corporations or SaaS companies and startups. You need to create this design community that is supported from both a technical and cultural side to feel good. And this is something that a lot of, I know that Figma has done a lot of research into how design operations platforms and operations work, and companies that have good design ops kind of setups are 4.3 times more likely to be securing hires. And I think there's the internal tooling is something that we should really be thinking about in terms of how we try to support this growth, personal growth. And then also creating cultures of autonomy, right? So if I'm able to affect the way that a company is going, people are 30% more likely to go to your company rather than to others. And I think from a perspective of where we can make moves on communication, is that right now communication feels more like it's like proving that you're doing work and trying to speed things up, but it actually ends up slowing us down. So I think some things that we can try to think about to support that would be asynchronous communications, things like video chat tools and short form communication tools, which we'll go into talking about. And then also shifting to an outcomes focus, right? Where here we're not talking about whether or not you're at work every day or where how you're doing it, or if you're in the office doing it. It's this that at the end of the day, you're making the goals of the company happen. We're having these outcomes that you're setting, and then also are accountable for achieving, and then showing that as a way to create value at a company and reframe how we have to do that work and when we have to do that work and where we have to do that work. So I think all that to say is that I think there is this new role that exists in a future of collaboration. And this was something that I really focused a lot on when I was at IDEO CoLab. And there's this kind of like interstitial like section where it's you're trying to breed the culture that you want inside of the organization. You're like a highly experienced craft person that's very technical. And then you're also someone who's focusing on creating the design systems that everyone needs to function inside of this new world. And I think that I'm coming to call this creative ritual ops. And so what these creative rituals do is they create unique cultural moments to bring teams together. And I can talk more about how this happens on the next sort of slide. So I want to talk more about creative rituals. So these are basically just routines and like things that you might do or set with your team to help foster this kind of new whatever goals that you're wanting to actually achieve. You can basically create these like small moments in your day-to-day work environment to then kind of get to know how you might want to instill new types of meaning inside of those moments. And so I think when we have these rituals, they should always have a purpose. And I think from the moment when you start to get up in the morning and know when you're coming into work that you want to have that moment, that thing, like I'm going to go in and I'm going to, get to do my mindfulness exercise, or I know that I have like office hours today and I'm going to go help some people. Those give people these like meaning of purpose in their day-to-day workplaces. And so I think from a lot of what we're trying to do with creating this new type of learning is also to create togetherness. And I think part of that is what I try to do when I'm using Figma, as I try to misuse it. So I'll actually try to create different sorts of little rooms as files. And so a lot of what comes out of that is creating these small activities that people on teams can do in a remote environment to actually both upskill how they're learning the tools that we're using at a company, and also have fun while doing it. So at IDEO, I created some little, like a board game, essentially, that you could play entirely in Figma. So anybody can create a copy of this file. They're like full-on game pieces. There's a little spinner. And while people are learning and playing in this environment, they're getting better at using the tool that they're trying to use for work. And so that was a great experiment that I think really helped us both like learn through play and have a greater impact on how we came together as a team. Not only is it a ritual, but it's also a way for us to learn and kind of bring everyone together inside the same kind of area. Because if I'm not coming to that tool, then I'm scared of it. I might be scared of it as someone who's not using it day to day. So that could be an interesting way to kind of create a small sort of like team ritual, right? These bits of fun. Another thing might be creative rituals where you're kind of creating these environments for pontification or like any sort of group activity. I know we were in when we were redesigning how CoLab was going to work at IDEO, we were in a very kind of it was a very uncertain time, and I put together this like template in Figma that actually allowed us to write haikus together about what our future kind of goals were going to be for setting our direction. And that template then took together our haiku bits and sort of mixed them all around together to create new meaning. And together we were able to start to think about how we wanted to mix together these ideas of where we wanted to go. And I think that's just a way for you to kind of get around the hard part of the conversation, right? It's a way for you to drive it in a different way, and using a tool that we all kind of like need to know and work in is a way to then empower those people to feel like they can keep contributing. And these creative rituals don't have to be inside of a tool or be like a weekly meeting or something like that. I know at the office with the Surgeon General, where I was recently, we took the last couple of minutes of every meeting to just be mindful and take deep breaths and do a breathing exercise, and be thankful for the people that were around us. And that really helped foster a really good sense of mental health while we were there. And so I think that's a great way to do that. And I also think at times when you are working towards this kind of like, I feel like every moment I'm losing time during the week, getting pulled aside by people that are trying to like, help me, or I need to get unstuck and these kinds of things. I actually found that when I was at IDEO CoLab, we also had these kinds of like office hours. We would post it up on a physical wall, a door, a space. And if you go into an office, you can still do that. Just paste it up, put it on a calendar or something, and have people be able to schedule office hours with you or with someone else every week, and alternate days on who can have those moments. Because I think that kind of thing can actually make it so that you're not wasting these small moments on like small things that could have been saved for like, save it for Thursday when we're gonna do these office hour moments. Or if a team is really, really needing help, then they can grab time during that office hour to get somebody unstuck. And I think that's when you have these like come to me for kind of moments of like, I am an expert in X. You can come get advice and I can help you get unstuck. And that's like a really good way of reducing these kind of like time suck tasks. And a lot of that was a product of us needing to guide a lot of teams and really needing to do it in a very time efficient manner. So and I'm also going to talk a little bit about building better design system and operations in Figma, because that's just what I do a lot day to day. I think that Figma design systems and shared libraries are super powerful when they're well maintained, but they can also be so maintained or so complex that they can hinder us if they're not laid out properly or like humanly searchable. And I don't know if I want to get into that particularly too deep today, but I think the interesting thing that I want to start to instill is creating these kind of micro tools and stepping stones for people to get into wanting to maintain those kinds of things. And I think that's part of design stewardship in your organization, right? Of being someone that is part of this like craft mentality. You're actually trying to represent design across an org for both senior designers and junior designers in an organization. And so something that I usually do when I'm creating these new kind of design systems is that I'll create a space for everybody who's in these files to come and like find things, because that's the hardest thing I think actually is finding things and knowing where everything is. And so I usually, whenever I create new files, I have like a project home that has links to all these other different things. And also just buttons that lead to onboarding tutorials that I've just made with text boxes and screenshots of like, hey, if you're new to Figma or this document, please just click this button and go over here and we can show you how to use it. Like things like how to zoom in, how to zoom out, how to select stuff, how to like edit things. That's why I think this person that's in this creative ritual ops role is thinking more about the design team and how they get their work done more than just the output, right? This person's not really focused on like the day-to-day of the end user. They might be focused on creating a better experience for the designers that are making that product, or for creating that culture within your team. And a lot of times that can be accomplished by really making these other design system components. Like I'm actually focusing on making components that then feed into and enable others, right? So here I have an example of like an event template that I made for one of our last IDEO CoLab Blueprint events, which was our annual event. And I made it so that other people could make these slides and stuff without having to download the fonts, without having to download any kind of shared libraries or anything. They could just kind of enter the text into these little controllers, and they could generate these assets without being an expert in Figma. They could just move stuff around and click. All you needed to know was like how to zoom in and out, how to edit text, how to select stuff. And I think that's what, when you're making these kinds of tools, it's very important for you to make them as easy to use as possible, so that other people can upskill. And so like another thing is to maybe even make them for things that aren't like product designs or anything like that. Here, I was actually making a podcast generator, or a podcast cover generator for a new podcast for the Office of the Surgeon General team, and all the comms designers on the team can now just create little covers for each and every episode without having to do much clicking around. They can actually just replace all the images and type in the episode name and hide and show things and recompose the entire sort of little composition just by me doing that upfront work to enable them to do that. And I think also just a lot of this is creating instructions, like creating basically like a way for you to use that and enable that to happen inside of those files. And a lot of what I like to do is also create these like image controllers. So like you have basically a bunch of different main components that then edit all the nested instances inside of a document. And that allows you to create a lot of different layouts and majorly change these sorts of things. And a lot of time I also do like to, when I'm creating stuff, document the nesting of things. Like I had made a set of step and repeat backgrounds, and the pattern, you could basically upload new logos and it would automatically flow them through all of the different step and repeat patterns that we needed. So it was just like saying like, hey, this main pattern is made of sets of rows of elements, and these are all different kinds of components that are nested within each other. And that context is hard to know if I'm just going into a file and looking at it and I'm like, oh, I don't know how any of this is laid out. Just like write it out in text next to the thing, or use the little, there's a little Figma documentation thing inside of the main components now, which is actually really useful. And so I want to talk a little bit also about asynchronous comms. So there's a video tool called that allows you to record these really nicely laid out, basically like video calls, where you're essentially creating a template of like something that you're trying to screen share, and it kind of clips you out of the background, and you can lay out everything, and it feels like you're producing like a news show. And I find that these are really great for like recording like remote all hands and things like that, or like episodes of learning chapters for courses and things like that. And I think that's actually a really great tool for increasing the quality of your distributed company video content. And it's really great to use. They also have this weird experimental version called OOO, which was like a video call tool that was trying to replace Zoom for a while, and that was really great. I don't know if it's still a thing anymore, but even so, the desktop app is really amazing. And also, I think Loom is really great for less than 5-minute videos. You can see here, I just have a whole bunch that I send to the station crew of like, hey, I'm like sharing these designs, and it's less than 5 minutes. and it takes those moments that would have been a meeting to share out designs. I can just take the 5 seconds or 5 minutes to record a flow of me looking at it in Figma and saying what to do, or what we should do, what I think we should do, and opens up that space for threading and composition inside of like Slack or Discord or wherever you're communicating. So that's just a thing to help, I think, with actually communicating asynchronously in a better way. And I would say for the next thing I want to talk about is actually separating generative and reductive spaces. And so that's something that I think held us back a lot, actually, is that people don't know when to be generative and when to be reductive. And at IDEO, a lot of times we were very much in the generative space, and we had trouble kind of bringing it down back to earth. But I think it was something that we do really well inside of synthesis when we're doing design research. So generative places are something where I'm trying to create as many ideas as possible and free up my mind for thinking. And I'm not thinking about like impossibilities and structures that might get to a real world solution, but I'm actually just trying to make as many ideas as possible. And a reductive space might be when I'm trying to hone down or scope down or remove ideas from the space. And I think that's a really key thing, is to try to create action steps when you're both generating those ideas, and then honing down into what you're actually going to build out of those things. And that's a really kind of, it's a tender space, because I think from a lot of moments when you're trying to work together with people, you tend to also be inside of a generative reductive space yourself. And so being in the same mindset as everyone else and having that kind of motion of like, I'm not going to like, try to take things down right now. I'm trying to produce things out into the world. It's a hard thing to do within yourself, but I think there's tools and spaces that we can do and steps that we can take to make people feel like they want to contribute those things. And so some tools that I like to do for this actually are things like Sprout, which is like a collaborative sort of like space thing. I don't really know what it is. It's a communication tool. But basically you have like an infinite canvas, and you can click and draw blocks and create face stocks and create small little environments for you to live in. You can paste in images and draw, and it does really create a nice space for you and other people to ideate in a thinky type way. And I call these things thinky type tools because they are mind and spatial thinking tools, right? So there's a non-linear connection between all of these ideas. And I think that's a key thing about a generative space, is that it is non-linear. Like there's no like step of like where we're going to get to next. It's like, oh, this is just a mishmash of ideas. And after that, we'll find the meaning. But I think these tools are really great for celebrating the togetherness of people when you're in them. Because I mean, you can create these little face stocks for everybody to chill in and talk with. You get to talk with each other in. And you can sit alongside your ideas in the space. So it feels like you're surrounded by this generative mindset. Canopio actually does a really great thing where you can connect ideas together that lead into others and then exports to a text file if you need to. But I really do like their live spaces that allow for like big think jams and things like that. So these are really good tools to check out. FigJam and Miro are both generative and reductive in that like they are tools for brainstorming. And even just having the tool sets, like, creating like all of this different methodology of like drawing and Post-its and voting dots and stickers and reacts, and like being able to wave if I'm in FigJam and I just like wiggle my mouse, I can turn into a hand and like, people can get high five each other. It's a great feeling of making collaboration fun. And I think that's kind of the methodology that we should be in when we're in a generative space. But when we're trying to, get down and be reductive, they also have tools like timers and voting dots, and there's also voting plugins for FigJam and Miro too, which I think is also a great solution if you can't use FigJam. I know some people are limited in what they can and can't use. I do recommend Miro because it's very similar. It still has a timer. It still has voting features. It still has sections and things like that. So I would definitely use this for when you're trying to generate and then also come together at the same time. But I think there's definitely some great mindset sharing that you need to get into when you're using these tools. And then also Linear, which is a great like a replacement for Jira and Asana in terms of like combining them together, basically of being a reductive tool that helps you kind of synchronize and come together on things. Really great. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit about the future of what collaboration is, I think, in my mind. And it would be weird if I didn't talk about Web3 because that's what I'm doing right now. And so I think in the future, in a Web3 powered future, we might not have a centralized organization to work for or with which we do work. And I think there's also the reality that everything that we do is being done in a tool that we don't own. And that's a very scary thing, right? All these SaaS companies can basically change how we access that tool at any time. And so we're not working in tools where we can own our work. And that's a big deal to me, at least, and especially after working at Adobe. So, and I think the other interesting thing is that when we think about our professional network, we're very limited to who we're employed by. Like we know who we work with at our company, and there are other people that I might work with freelance, or like other people that I know and I trust that I work with. But in a Web3 world, I can actually trustlessly interact with people. So I can find people in these things called DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations that are kind of like companies, but different. And I have some great resources on what DAOs are and how they work in the references section of this talk. But basically, in this space, you might not know these people, and you're actually enabled in environments that support it, like things like what I'm building, Station, where you can basically come together with teams on these in these DAOs that help to fund projects and do work together without ever actually knowing them, or like, I mean, you can, obviously you probably have to talk to them to work with them, but there might be something where you're actually, trustlessly collaborating with them and getting paid to do work. And, you're building a reputation together without actually kind of physically ever, meeting each other. So I think that's an interesting thing about how Web3 will start to enable us in this collaborative world. And so there are decentralized tools that we can do, that we can use as companies and as individuals too. Something called Skiff that I use for basically is like a Google Apps clone, or like decentralized version of these sort of things. You have a mail app, you have a storage of Drive that stores everything on IPFS, which is the Interplanetary File System, and it's up there forever on the blockchain. And there's also a Google Docs clone that is all collaborative. I can invite people based on their ENS addresses, which are Ethereum name server addresses, where I can be reached by anyone and contacted by anyone to do work and collaborate, which is super cool. And I own it, which is great. And then also there's something called AnyType, which is like an operating system that is basically identical to Notion. But all of it is stored through your, basically your wallet and key phrase, and you can resaturate it. There's a seed associated with your account. So you do own it, which is really great. And I think that these two tools get to actually work together and replace a very large part of your working stack as like a startup. You could be owning all of your data rather than giving it to other SaaS companies to do with whatever they will. So I think that's a really great way to kind of step into how you want to collaborate in the future of this Web3 world. And so there are communities out there that are doing this work, right? So like the Nouns DAO, for example, Nouns is like it's basically they're just minting NFTs every like 15 minutes and getting an auction to raise a treasury to then fund projects. So you can, as a Nouns voter, basically create a proposal for a project that you want to do, and you can get funded by the treasury. The community votes on whether or not they want to pay for that project to happen. And that's kind of what we're also thinking about powering at Station, right? We're trying to basically create this world where you can collaborate with anyone. It doesn't have to be tied to a centralized company or any kind of direct attachment to anything, really. I mean, you could be part of a DAO, and you could also be part of multiple DAOs. So that's an interesting kind of concept. And I think that what comes out of this, right, is this kind of like proof of active participation. And some noun people have been trying to build these profiles where you track basically like someone's on-chain experience, right? Like, LinkedIn is tracking my resume. So these soul-bound NFTs that can't be traded away or bought are attached to me when I do this work, and I can build up a reputation that I can own. And I will always be attached to me no matter what. It's because it's attached to my wallet. And so I think that's a very powerful future, right, of how we can network and find each other without ever actually having to, give anyone else anything about ourselves, which is really cool, at least I think. So to summarize, I just want to say that, there are many new skills that have come up during this like move towards remote work. And in a lot of ways, the Web 2 and normal traditional work world has moved into this decentralized way. And I think when we start to restructure everything, this Web3 method of working in decentralized structures is something that will benefit us like way more than we, I think, traditionally might have, in terms of like how companies are laid out and not really benefiting from, and you're not really benefiting from the work that you're doing for them. So that's a really interesting thing that I think is going to change in the future of collaboration. And I think the most important things to think about when you're trying to work with other people is, or choose an environment where you're going to work with other people, would be to, have that autonomy over your schedule, and know how you do your work with other people, and wonder how you grow and how we grow together, is to foster this kind of this growth through each other, which is really interesting. So always be learning, always be teaching is the thing that I want to express. So, and I know this is a lot of Figma stuff, but there are a lot of alternatives to Figma. So I would say, if you can't or won't use Figma, use Sketch, maybe Adobe XD. If you don't have a Sketch license or Adobe apps, use Google Slides. You can collaborate so well with Google Slides. We actually made a ton of different collaborative templates for workshops at IDEO in just Google Slides, and we hosted workshops with like hundreds of people in Google Slides. So I think that's a very real thing that you can do. And if you can't use Google Apps, something like TL Draw, which is actually really interesting. This is a clickable link in the slides, and the slides will be available after this. But TL Draw is like a really nice little collaborative tool for drawing, and doing a lot of other stuff actually, which is really cool. I have this link here for other tools that I like and I made while I was at IDEO, and I still kind of try to update as new things come out. I have a bunch of templates that you can use on my Figma community page, and there's going to always be more because I'm always making more of them. And yeah, so you can find me after this talk. We'll do some Q&A here. I think I might have went a little bit over or a little bit under, I don't know. But this is kind of where to find me. And the slides are already up at jacobw.glitch.me if you want to keep looking at these after we're done here. So yeah, I'm going to come back out of here, and hopefully I haven't just talked to no one for the last hour and a half.
No, that's awesome, Jacob. And thanks for sharing your slide deck as well. I know that I'm super interested in digging in there and clicking on some of those links. I think I knew maybe 4 of the 40 tools that you just mentioned. So I've got a lot of research to do. Thank you for that. Yeah, let's go ahead and flip it over to some questions, either in the room, or Julia, if you can help with the online part of the questions. But I'll go ahead and start off with one that I have on my own, and you guys can think about some as well. And I was curious, maybe short stories that you might tell, maybe 2. One of a collaboration event project that was just so crazy great, and maybe some of the why it was so crazy great. And then the other way, like a collaboration experience that you had that was just not, and what went off the rails and why.
I will say a lot of time, I can maybe start with the one that was bad, actually, because I do have one starkly in my mind. It was like a lot of times at IDEO, we would have embedded clients inside of our work. And this was when I was doing a little bit of consulting. This wasn't part of the IDEO collab work, which was all collaborative. And those are actually some of my best memories, actually, is doing stuff in the collaborative side. But I think in the consulting side, you sometimes had basically a client team, or like 2 or 3 people, where they would be in the room with you from like CVS or wherever they were from, doing stuff. And time to time, it was very overbearing sometimes when you were having to communicate and like kind of dumb down what you were talking about to talk to these people and collaborate with these people. But then I think the interesting thing to me was that I learned a lot from it in terms of like how I need to communicate to others who might be operating at a lower craft level than me. And when I say like craft level, it's like, oh, like you don't know about code, you don't know about like working in Figma day to day, or like drawing with vectors and things like that. And I think there's a little bit of leeway with how you can try to foster that learning, or you can let those. I think in the issue that I'm talking about was more of the people that were on that client team really just like were not interested at all, and like weren't jazzed. And I think that the only success that I found with them was to create they were really into seeing like what we could do as mechanical engineers and stuff. So I would basically like make these small interactive prototypes for them to like touch and to feel. I remember there was the guy, I made this like heartbeat sensor that had like 2 little, it was like an orb, and then like glowed and used it displayed your heartbeat when you held it. And it just like blew his mind. And then all of a sudden that like I had a little unlock for him of like, oh, I can like try to, make this idea better. And that was kind of, I think, the moment after like we started working together really was like, I'm going to make a small thing that is easy for me to make. Like it took me like 20 minutes to put together. And then like, he also was like, oh, he watched me do it and then said like, oh, that was really easy. Well, maybe I can try to do that if it was that easy. So I think showing people and having them be in the room with you to create those kind of like moments where they can engage is like a really interesting thought. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would say it was bad in terms of like day to day. They really just like hung out and like did nothing. So I think that was the bad part. But I think when the moments that it did kind of work were like when we were trying to, improve on ideas together. And I think that was the good part. I would say with Colab, day to day, just like seeing over time, we had cohorts at Colab. So basically like, and I mean, I work with some ex-fellows at Station right now, which is great. So, I've like built up of that network over like 5 years of like, every month we have like a new set of 30 people that I have to get to know and teach and learn from. And that was really great, being able to collaborate with like that many people day to day. And then also see where they're going. I made this little thing called Life After Lab. That's a FigJam file. And I was like, all right, it's been like 8 years since I've seen any of you. And I tried to reach out to as many of them as I could. And I put like a little FigJam saying like, hey, what is your life like? How did Colab affect you? And like, at least like 30 to 40 people have like posted their stories, which is really amazing. So it's great to see that kind of like impact, I think, in terms of like where people go after the collaboration takes place. And I think the collaboration was so good because we were basically all locked in a room for like 2 weeks, and not locked in a room, I would say, but we were all in the same space, coming into the same space together for like 2 weeks in a very highly intensive kind of sprint schedule. And during that time, you really do become friends. And I think that's the same sort of thing that we have to intentionally do when we're in a remote environment, right? Like you have to schedule one-on-ones, you have to create that time for those office hours and rituals to make it feel like it did when you were in the office. So I think that's a big key thing to think about there.
Yeah,
Sorry,
great.
that was really...
Thanks.
We have time if you want for one more question, maybe, because like.
I have a simple question. You were talking about your DAO, the IPFS. Is it built on Tezos, Lightning Network? What blockchain are you using on your DAO? And how many node holders do you have?
Were you able to hear that, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have a DAO personally. No, Station is a product that basically allows DAOs to have decentralized proposals. So we partner with DAOs, and you can basically set one up if you have a multi-sig wallet on a lot of different networks. Where we have, I don't know, I can look right now. Actually, just I think we have Goerli, we have Ethereum, we have some other L2s, but yeah, I mean, I think from most support you would get is the ETH crowd. But yeah, I think that's pretty. I don't have a DAO, no. So sorry if that was confusing.
All right, thanks for taking my question. We're working on a Florida DAO at Smart Florida built on Tezos. So I'd love to talk to you later about that.
We have one
That's super exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have one question online. I could share it on the screen too, but it says, from Melissa, I love your perspective, Jacob. I'm currently the only remote full-time employee on my team and trying to implement better systems internally for us to reach our strategic goals. What is your advice to help encourage my in-person team to use digital systems versus just sending majority of tasks through email?
I think from a perspective of you being the only remote person, it's going to be more difficult for sure. I think there's the part of what I didn't like about hybrid work was that there is like a weird animosity between like the Zoom box and you and the people that are in person. I think if you do have other tools that you can communicate rather than email, because I know that nowadays email has become like just I don't answer my email. I think like the question that I think that might be good to ask is like what communication channels you can set up that people would adopt that you could create a better back and forth with others. And I think like, having a list or solutions. I know when I try to introduce a new tool, I'll, send out some sort of communique with like, hey, there's this really cool tool. Here's what I think it can do, like some bullet points of like how to actually do it. And then I'll have a, for example, like if I was going to try to get Loom approved or something for use to get everybody else to use it, I might have like what I think it can do for us. And then I might like, make something in it, like make a Loom to like sell Loom to the rest of your team, or like make a Fig Jam to sell Fig Jam to the rest of your team, because I think they're going to interact with that artifact a lot more and more quickly be like, oh yeah, no, or like, oh yeah, yes, and be able to give you that feedback, right? And I think that's something that a lot of times at IDEA we call them sacrificial concepts, right? It's a thing that you create so that people can just say something about it. It's like it's there so I can say something about it. Because if it's not there, then I might not engage. I might not be able to like know why I don't like something or why I do like something. So that could be a way that could help you try to introduce these tools to the rest of your team. Yeah. Helpful.
I know there's like a
Do we have time for any more? Because I have at least one, but I don't want to hog question time. Any?
How about like as long as it's a different person, but yes, we can give Mike one if you guys don't have any. Give everyone a chance, because Mike and I interact with Jacob often.
I have a question. So on how is the decentralized approach to collaboration different from the existing collaborative approaches that a lot of fully remote companies already use?
I mean, I don't know if it's that much different in terms of if you are a fully remote company. I would say that it is different in terms of how you interface and how you get paid and how you are employed. For example, like if I do work for a DAO, I would be, kind of, right now it's very easy for me to, lose funds based off of like someone just trying to, just screw me over essentially. I think there's a lot of safeguards that need to be put in place. Like if I was doing any work with like a DAO, I would find much more comfort if they were using something like a Gnosis safe or like or some sort of smart contract to pay me, so that I don't have to worry about that trust, like, right? Because it's in this new Web3 world, I think there's the aspect of a trustless relationship. And I think that's the biggest thing that is different, right? Like I am just a wallet address to the blockchain. And so how do I work with others when others don't know if they can trust that technology? How can I trust another person using that technology? So I think there's like a lot of stuff where we have to abstract the trust out of that system. And I mean, a lot of that is up to like Solidity programmers and smart contracts programmers and developers. But I think day to day in a decentralized world, I'm still like meeting up with people via like Discord and like being on video calls and talking over text and things like that. I think it's very, very similar. I just think that the way that a company is structured would be fundamentally different. Like if I work for a DAO, I'm actually, having stake in a community, and I can be rewarded when I do work that betters the entire community and makes it more valuable. And I think that in itself is inherently not supported in some companies, at least in capitalistic companies. But I think that's, all companies are probably capitalistic companies at this point, maybe not Patagonia or something, but yeah. So that's just how I feel about that.
I also have an idea.
Okay.
Because what we could do, and I hate to cut this off so soon, but because obviously Jacob has a wealth of knowledge in all these tools I've never heard of. I use Loom. I love Loom, but I don't even know half the stuff he talked about. But it's really exciting to see what is out there and what we can do, in a potentially remote, like a dominant remote, future remote workforce. I think it would be great, and we can do this, where Mike, you can still stay on. I end the broadcast. It won't be live, obviously, to the world, but if anyone wants to interact with him directly, unless Jacob has to run. Y'all can stay up with him, and I encourage you all to continue to network, out there if that's all okay with you, and yeah, because we do have another event after this, and I would love to have a little break. But yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us online. And thank you so much, Jacob. I appreciate you. We tried to get him here in person, I promise. But it didn't work out for his schedule. And he's actually willing to do this again sometime in the near future to come in person. And Mike, thank you so much for all your help with making this happen as well and getting Refresh Tallahassee to come out. I really appreciate you both. Mike, why don't you go ahead and cap it up?
All right. Does cap it up mean I get to ask one more question, or am I just saying thank you? I'm going to say thank you. Jacob, I'm calling you when we're done, and I'm going to ask you a question. No, thanks to you all for coming. This was great. And Julia, again, in addition to all the work you put into this, it's times 50 or some other number of events that you're also doing for Startup Week Tallahassee. So you've been working so hard, and that means a ton. And really, on behalf of all of us, thank you for what you're doing. Jacob, Julia already said it, but thanks tons for the time and the insight. It was a lot, very enlightening, and I look forward to digging into those tools. And certainly, I know for me, probably for most of us, working remotely, collaborating remotely, using tools like you've mentioned is a big part of where we're headed. So peace and thanks.
Cool. See ya.